Oh, hello, and welcome to Andre Knows Everything. I'm Andre. My name is Andre Morton. I am a comedian. I am a podcaster. You may have seen me on my other podcast, The Walt Vault, or podcasts that I've had before, like Black Enough or Virtual Constructs. That's an old one, an oldie but a goodie. I like talking about stuff, and I like learning about stuff. So that's what this podcast is going to be about. I am basically just on a quest for knowledge, even though I'm a pretty dumb guy. I dropped out of college, didn't graduate, didn't finish, and now I'm realizing that I do like learning, at least a little bit at a time. So what I'm going to try and do with this podcast is learn a little bit about a specific topic for about an hour each week. And I'm going to do it all just by Googling stuff on the internet. So, I'm going to be looking at a lot of Wikipedia articles. I'm going to try to find other sources that are a little bit more, potent. But at the same time, I'm not going to be reading the entire thing. I'm just learning just a little bit, and you get to go on that journey with me and help me learn. That's what I would really like from you, the listener, is to leave me comments down below on YouTube or on iTunes in the reviews or whatever, on my Instagram page at Andre Morton Jr. And help me out with these topics that I don't know that much about. Speaking of not knowing about things, I feel like I'm a dumb guy. I'm smarter than the average Joe, I suppose. But I feel like most of the time I'm stupid. So forgive me for flubs and forgive me for everything that I say wrong up top. I'm not an educator. I'm not big brained. I'm small brained. I'm trying to get bigger brained. That's me. So today is Friday, June 5th. 2020. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and we are living through what some would call a race war. I'm not one of those people that would call it that, but that's kind of the hits you get out in society because of George Floyd, his passing, his murder by police officers. So what I want to learn today is about the police. What have them fools been up to since their incarnation in the United States and outside? We'll jump around. I've got a lot of time on my hands. I'm off work today. Speaking of which, let me just talk about my interactions with law enforcement. My father works in law enforcement, or worked. He's retired now. He was a correctional officer for his entire career. He also was in the Navy and the Air Force. So he laid down the law at home. Also, I work at a prison. I work in an office at the prison. But I interact with officers almost daily. These are correctional officers, not police officers. There is a difference, but it is law enforcement. So that's my thing. I have been. If you're listening to the audio version of this, go ahead and check out the YouTube version. But I'm a black dude. Have been my entire life, and therefore I have been stopped by the police before. Never has been violent for me personally, but since a very young age I have been afraid of the police, basically with every interaction that I've ever had with them. There's always fear there, always, and that is because of events that have happened in the past with individuals who are not me, but individuals who look like me. So let's look at the police. Let's figure out what they're about, where they came from, what they're doing now, and what they're going to do in the future. Welcome to Andre Knows Everything. Here we go. I'm running an iPad over here. It's being mirrored on my TV back here. That's just to give you a little bit of visual aid. All of the links that I'm looking at, I'm going to try and keep in the description below so you can check them out for yourselves, because I'm, once again, not going to be able to read everything that I see. on these. Okay. Basic description. Let me give you my basic description of what the police are. They're a government-aided unit, tool, force, peoples who help enforce and enforce laws and arrest criminals. Right? Does that sound good? Let's see what Wikipedia says. The police are a constituted body of persons empowered by a state with the aim to enforce the law, to ensure the safety, health, and possessions of citizens, and to prevent crime and civil disorder. Sounds good. I mean, on paper, right here, sounds fine. Let's see here. I pulled up a couple of links already. I will expound and move on to other things as we go along. So I have an article here from time.com. This is how the U.S. got its police force. So this is kind of what I'm most interested in, because I've heard that, this might be history classes from high school. This might be an article that I read a couple years ago. There's just stuff in my brain already. But I've heard that the police force in the U.S. actually started around the times of slavery, and that the police force, their main goal when they first started was just to catch runaway slaves. Hey, you darkies, get back here. You're not supposed to be out running around by yourself. Go back to your master and get back to work for no money. All right. That's what they were meant to do. So let's read and figure out if that's the truth and how they evolved from that to arresting everybody. The U.S. police force is a relatively modern invention, sparked by changing notions of public order, driven in turn by economics and politics, according to Gary Potter, a crime historian at Eastern Kentucky University. Policing in colonial America had been very informal, based on a for-profit, privately funded system that employed people part-time. So it was like you volunteer to go. It's like neighborhood watch, basically. Towns also commonly relied on a night watch, in which volunteers signed up for a certain day and time, mostly to look out for fellow colonists engaging in prostitution or gambling. They was on the lookout for them hoes, They was like, hey, hoes, stop it. Boston started one in 1636, New York followed in 1658, and Philadelphia created one in 1700. But that system wasn't very efficient because the watchmen often slept and drank while on duty, and there were people who were put on watch duty as a form of punishment. Hey, go go police people because I'm mad at you. I was like, okay, I'm gonna not do that. It's pretty easy to just not. Night watch officers were supervised by constables, but that wasn't exactly a high sought-after job either. Early policemen didn't want to wear badges because these guys had bad reputations to begin with, and they didn't want to be identified as people that other people didn't like. When localities tried compulsory service, if you were rich enough, you paid someone to do it for you, ironically a criminal or a community thug. Interesting. Very interesting. As the nation grew, different regions made use of different policing systems. Okay, wait. Let me just let y'all know. This article was written by Miss Olivia Waxham on May 18th, 2017, just to cover my bases or whatever. Once again, the link is down below. So let's kind of get to it. The first publicly funded organized police force with officers on duty full-time was created in Boston in 1838. Boston was a large shipping commercial center, and businesses had been hiring people to protect their property and safeguard the transport of goods from the port of Boston to other places. These merchants came up with a way to save money by transferring the cost of maintaining a police force to citizens by arguing that it was for a collective good. Okay, good intentions, protecting property. Kind of reminds me of the mafia for whatever reason, but it was well intentioned, at least seemingly in 1938 in Boston. 1838, excuse me. In the South, however, the economics that drove the creation of police forces were centered not on the protection of shipping interests, but on the preservation of the slavery system. Aha! Okay, so I was right in one effect, is that in some places, the police were started just to catch slaves, and in other places, they were started as a mafia front runner to protect businesses and stuff like that, as a collective good. Let's see here. Some of the primary policing institutions that were the slave patrols is tasked with chasing down runaways and preventing slave revolts. The first formal slave patrol had been created in Carolina colonies in 1704. During the Civil War, the military became the primary form of law enforcement in the South, but during Reconstruction, many local sheriffs functioned in a way analogous to the earlier slave patrols, enforcing segregation and the disenfranchisement of freed slaves. In general, throughout the 19th century and beyond, the definition of public order, that which the police officer was charged with maintaining, depended whom was asked. Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I'm here to maintain order. Like, yeah, I'm in here to maintain order by keeping them darkies in line. For example, businessmen in the late 19th century had both connections to politicians and an image of the kinds of people most likely to go on strike and disrupt their workforce. So it's no coincidence that by the late 1880s, all major U.S. cities had police forces. Fears of labor union organizers and of large waves of Catholic, Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants who looked and acted differently from the people who had dominated cities before drove the call for the preservation of law and order, or at least the version of it promoted by dominant interests. For example, people who drank at taverns rather than at home were seen as dangerous people by others, but they might have pointed out other factors such as how living in smaller homes make drinking in a tavern more appealing. The irony of this logic, Potter points out, is that the businessmen who maintained this belief were often the ones who profited off the commercial sale of alcohol in public places. So, all of this to say is that the police system in America, as it stands, has always systematically kind of been built upon a corrupt system, right? It's never been completely altruistic. Police are the good guys, and they stand up for good and only do good, and in every situation are the best. That has never been the case, and probably never will be the case, unfortunately. You know, like I like superheroes a lot because superheroes kind of embody that very altruistic notion of I'm gonna do good to do good, despite my faults. I'm gonna try my best to be the absolute best at helping others because I have extra power and whatnot. And you know, when I was a little kid, I equated superheroes kind of with the police, you know. Batman would go out, he'd beat people up to serve justice, and the cops would be like, wow, thanks, Batman. We really appreciate you beating up that clown dude because we couldn't necessarily handle it. And we're glad you're on our side. And we're all on the same side, and things will be okay. Hey, thanks, Superman, for coming in and rescuing that plane full of people because we wouldn't have been able to do it. But if we could, we would, because we're the police and we want to be just as good as you, Superman. But as you got older and you start seeing some of the things that the police have done in the past, that falls away very quickly. And I think when you're black, it falls away so much faster, or black or brown, you know, any kind of minority in America, you see that the police are definitely not that from a pretty young age, you know. I don't have a very specific memory, you know. I remember my dad when I was really young telling me like, hey, look out for police officers. They're the ones who you want to go to if you're in trouble. You know, but I also have a story from my dad who told me not too long ago that he got pulled over one time, driving home from work, I think. And the cop came in. My dad put his hands on the steering wheel so that the cop could see his hands, and that freaked out the cop. He drew his gun and pointed it at my dad, saying, "What are you doing? Give me your license." You know, all of that rigmarole. And he's like, "I'm just putting my hands here so that you can see them. I'm not trying to do anything dangerous. And then eventually he showed them his correctional officer badge, and it kind of went away. But that initial spark of fear could have easily ended my dad's life. He pulled out his gun for no reason except that he was scared. Where was I going with any of this? I don't remember. So let's move on a little bit. Let's dive a little bit further down. Oh, this article isn't that much longer. Let's read the rest of it. Okay. The late 19th century was an era of political machines. So police captains and sergeants for each precinct were often picked by the local political party ward leader, who often owned taverns or ran street gangs that intimidated voters. They then were able to use police to harass opponents of that particular political party or provide payoffs for officers to turn a blind eye to allow illegal drinking, gambling, and prostitution. That was in the late 19th century. I want to let you know that all of that, absolutely all of it, happens today in 2020. And it's kind of incredible that not much has changed. The situation was exacerbated during Prohibition, leading President Hoover to appoint the Wickersham Commission in 1929 to investigate the ineffectiveness of law enforcement nationwide. To make police independent from political party ward leaders, the map of police precincts was changed so that they would not correspond with political wards. Well, that's nice. 1929. The drive to professionalize the police force followed, which meant that the concept of a career cop as we'd recognize it today is less than a century old. I mean, it's a new thing for a cop to start his career early and go all the way until it's time to retire. Further campaigns for police professionalism were promoted as the 20th century progressed, but crime historian Samuel Walker's The Police in America, an introduction, argues that the move toward professionalism wasn't all good. That movement, he argues, promoted the creation of police departments that were inward-looking and isolated from the public, and crime control tactics that ended up exacerbating tensions between police and the communities they watch over. And so, more than a half century after Kennedy's 1963 proclamation, the improvement and modernization of America's surprisingly young police force continues to this day. All right, thank you, Time. I also have another article here. Protests against police have broken out across the country. Here's how policing has evolved in the U.S. since its beginnings in the 1600s. Oh, look at that. Look at this guy. Man, cop mustaches, they have been a staple as well. They are just as deeply intrinsically rooted in the police system as corruption is. That's awesome. Good for them. Love your mustaches, guys. Let's see here. We've got some talk about George Floyd and his terrible passing. Did I mention that up top? That's why I'm talking about this. That George Floyd was murdered by a police officer on video, and it took them, I actually don't know how long it took them. It took them a long time to charge, even charge, let alone arrest or prosecute the officer involved in that killing. And also, the way in which he was killed was so brutal and so inhumane that it has sparked literally the largest civil rights movement in the history of the country. I read that stat the other day, that Black Lives Matter in 2020 regarding George Floyd's death and the rallies and the protests and the marches that have been set up in the past, 3 weeks, have equated to the largest civil rights movement in history, which is just great. I mean, I guess it's great that the civil rights movement is as big as it is and that there's this much outcry coming out for this. But it's so terrible that this is the way it had to happen. And each thing in the news that has come up over the past 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 120, 50 years has been just as terrible, you know? From freaking Trayvon Martin to George Floyd to Rodney King to all of the horrible deaths that we never even heard of because they weren't covered back in the old days, you know? It's all awful. And it truly hurts my heart. And that, you know, it's hard to even talk about, honestly. because it feels so personal when a cop takes a life like that in that way. It feels like he's gonna get up off of his neck and come and do it to me. He's gonna get up off his neck and come do it to my dad, my brother, and my sister, and my mom, and anyone else that looks like us, because he has the power of wearing that badge, and he can do whatever he wants. Okay, so let's move on. So I kind of want to see what cops look like in different places, because I know that police brutality is a big thing here in the U.S. But I also know that in other countries, a lot of cops don't even have guns. You know, they're there more in a mentality of like, hey, we're here to keep a lookout and keep everything under control and take people in if they need to come in. And we're going to try and do that with the least amount of violence as possible, which sounds just lovely. It's the world that I'd like to live in, but unfortunately it's not. So law enforcement by country. Let's look at the UK. Is it listed as United Kingdom? Because I know that they don't have those officers don't carry guns on a regular basis. Let's just read about them a little bit. And they're a much older country than us. So theoretically, our policing system probably should have been based upon theirs. But obviously the gun thing didn't happen until much more recently. United Kingdom. Widely regarded as the home of the first modern police force, law enforcement in the United Kingdom is based on a long-standing philosophy of policing by consent. Should I not do that the entire time I read this? Okay, I'll stop. Policing and law enforcement are organized separately in each of the legal systems in the United Kingdom as a result of the devolution of powers to Scotland, Northern Ireland, and to a lesser extent, London. England and Wales have 43 local police forces, formerly known as constabularies, each of which covers a police area, or which is like a county. Since 2012, 41 of these forces have their own directly elected police and crime commissioner under the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act of 2011. The two exceptions are in London, where the Metropolitan Police is accountable to the directly elected mayor via the Office for Policing and Crime, and the much smaller City of London Police that retains the Common Council of the city as police authority. Okay, so that all sounds lovely and fine. It seems like there's a lot more oversight over the police, and not that there isn't any oversight over the U.S. police as well. I'll get to that in a bit, but it seems like a lot of pieces have been put into place to oversee the police, and this policing by consent basis that they're on. I'm actually going to take a look at that because I don't really know what that means. Can I not consent to being policed? Peelian principles. The Peelian principles summarize the ideas that Sir Robert Peel developed to define an ethical police force. The approach expressed in these principles is commonly known as policing by consent in the United Kingdom and other countries, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In this model of policing, police officers are regarded as citizens in uniform. They exercise their powers to police their fellow citizens with the implicit consent of those fellow citizens. Policing by consent indicates that the legitimacy of policing in the eyes of the public is based upon a general consensus of support that follows from transparency about their powers, their integrity in exercising the powers, and their accountability for doing so. What? What is this? What? The fact that I've never heard of this, I guess I have heard of it, and the fact that I knew the UK officers didn't have guns, I guess that was the extent to which I knew about it. But the whole, they're just citizens in uniform that everybody agrees is cool, that they're like nice like that. That's interesting to me. So it came from early 19th century Britain. The government was trying to set up a police force. People were suspicious of the idea of a large and possibly armed police force and feared that it could be used to suppress protest or support unpopular rule. What? Where would you get that crazy idea from? That's nuts. I've never heard of such a thing. Since 1793, Britain had been at war with France, home of the best known, best organized, and best paid police force at the time. I might have to check them out after this, as well as a secret and political police force. And many Britons were uncomfortable with any police force's association with France. Most people did not think that it was the job of the national government to set up and control a police force, and thought it should be under local control. The concept of professional policing was taken up by Robert Peel when he became Home Secretary in 1822. Peel's Metropolitan Police Act in 1829 established a full-time, professional, and centrally organized police force of the Greater London area known as the Metropolitan Police. Okay, they have 9 principles of policing using this Peel principle. Let's go through these, and then I'll move on. So the 9 principles were as follows: to prevent crime and disorder, as an alternative to the repression by military force and severity of legal punishment, to recognize always that the power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions, and behavior, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. So what that says to me, which I just learned about this, so I can't confirm any of this, but what that says to me is that if we lived in a world with this, and someone like, what's that dude's name? Derek Chauvin, the murderer. If he did what he did to George Floyd under these principles, we as a collective group of citizens of the United States would be able to say, hey, we're not cool with that. So you guys are all shutting down right now until we can fix everything and get you guys back up and running. Like, we'd be able to just stop the police entirely because they're under our command rather than necessarily the government's command. You know, like we're in charge because as voters, we command the police. And since in America, in actuality, we pay taxes to pay for the police, you would think that we'd have a little bit of that, but we really don't, you know. It's not like they're self-contained, but it feels like they're far out of my control to stop them from doing anything, you know? Anyway, number 3, to recognize always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also securing the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of laws. I'm going to read that again because it kind of, sometimes stuff goes in here and then it comes right out of this headphone. Number 3, to recognize always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also securing of the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of laws. Oh, so it's kind of like a back and forth. You follow the law, then you get to tell us what to do. And if you guys aren't following the law, then we get to tell you what to do. Okay. It's so interesting. Because once again, it's something that sounds good on paper, but I wonder how it is in practice. Let's keep going. Number 4 of the Peel principles, to recognize always that the extent to which the cooperation of the police can be secured diminishes proportionately the necessity of the use of physical force and compulsion for achieving police objectives. So if y'all ain't fucking with us, then we ain't fucking with you. Don't start nothing. Won't be nothing. Number 5, to seek and preserve public favor, not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolutely impartial service to law, in complete independence of policy, and without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws, by ready offering of individual service and friendship to all members of the public without regard to their wealth or social standing, by ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humor, and by ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. I like number 5. Number 5 sounds good. Oh boy. Let's move on. Number 6, to use physical force only when the exercise of persuasion, advice, and warning is found to be insufficient to obtain public cooperation to an extent necessary to secure observance of law or to restore order, and to use only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving a police objective. Okay? A knee doesn't need to go in the neck for 9 minutes. It just doesn't. At all. I just had a thought. I didn't know about this, right? I didn't know about these principles. but I'm agreeing with a lot of them, right? They make sense to me in my head. And I almost wonder if police officers have ever thought to look at what other countries' law enforcement is like and see what their principles are, and maybe just adopt some of them personally. Because I think if I were to ever become a cop, I'd be remembering a lot of these things, you know, as I was being trained to do whatever it is that they are trained to do, you know? Interesting. I am going to go on to Reddit and look at like a police officer forum. We're going to see what they have to say about some of the things that have been going on, but that'll come a little later. Let's just get through a couple more of these principles. Nine is a lot, Mr. Peel. Number 8, to recognize always the need for strict adherence to police executive functions and to refrain from even seeming to usurp the powers of the judiciary, of avenging individuals or the state, and of authoritatively judging guilt and punishing the guilty. You can't be judge, jury, and executioner as a police officer. You cannot. You're not Judge Dredd, okay? Sit down. Play with your handcuffs. Number 9, to recognize always that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. That's a huge one, because the police are often funded not by the number of like convictions that happen, well, although sometimes that is the case, but by the number of like arrests and tickets. So the police can just prove that they're out there serving justice by just giving out as many tickets and citations and beatings as they possibly can, and that racks their numbers up and makes them seem like they're doing a good job, even if they're doing an absolutely terrible job. And that's right there in one of the main principles for these other countries. So that's cool. I like that a lot, and I don't think we'd be doing terribly to adopt something like that. The problem with completely changing our police structure as it stands right now in America is that not only will it take literally all of us to vote it out and vote it down or whatnot, but also in the U.S. our crime is hard. I mean, it's a lot. We have because of a whole bunch of other injustices and things like that. We have a lot of people who do dangerous, terrible things. And we need a fairly strong police force in order to stop them from doing those dangerous and terrible things. So I think a lot of the powers that are given to the police now in the U.S. stems from them being able to handle the level of threat that they come up against. But that being said, you can have all of those threats and still police yourselves. You could in theory still adopt some or even all of these principles and have an effective police force even against terrorism and gang violence and whatever else that the police have to stop. I guess. Once again, I'm the big dumb number 1. What do I fucking know? I couldn't get out of community college with a degree. You know what I'm saying? All right. So, many countries' police rarely use their guns. Here's why. I'm assuming that this is going to talk about the Peel principle or policing by consent. Let me just run through it real quick just to see. We're talking about Italy. We're talking about Germany. Here's an interesting quote. This is from Colonel U.A. Thiem. It says, "In every head of every policeman, there is the aim not to shoot." It says Colonel Thiem, the 4-star senior police director at the state's Office for Education, Training, and Human Resources. I believe this is in Germany. "We try to make all police officers recognize that you are not a good guy if you are shooting. You are a good guy if you are not shooting." That's very interesting. Because, once again, I think a lot of people who become police officers in our country kind of sees themselves as cowboys and heroes, you know, but those cowboys that they fashion themselves after were the fastest gun in the West. You know, they roll up into place, they kick down them swinging saloon doors, they bust out that gun, they go pew 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 pew, 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 y'all dead. All right, I'm the winner, I'm the hero. They also fashion themselves after some superheroes. I see a lot of superhero logos on people who like the police, on officers, but the heroes that they choose are weird. I've seen the Punisher symbol on so many vehicles. The Punisher symbol with the like American flag, you know, draped across it or whatever. And the Punisher, if you don't know, is a anti-hero who takes it upon him. He was a police officer, and after his family was gunned down, he takes it upon himself to start a one-man war on crime. And he does that by gathering as many weapons as humanly possible, going out and blasting every criminal that he can get his hands on. And he's very effective at it. He's so good. He's killed so many dudes, like a lot of dudes. And in the comics, you know, they make the Punisher out to be a person who really studies who he's going to kill and make sure that they deserve it. But once again, you can't be your own judge, jury, and executioner as a police officer. So the Punisher is wrong, is what I'm trying to say. And the people who look up to the Punisher as a good role model for a police officer, I think are incredibly wrong. That's a terrible attitude to have. You should not be going out, putting your uniform every day and thinking, I can't wait to kill some bad people today. You should be thinking, I can't wait to go help people today. That old dum number one, just a thought. All right. So that's police in other countries, right? Compared to us here in the U.S. I have been seeing a lot of things lately about defunding the police departments. I read a thing earlier that said that, and I'm definitely going to fudge these numbers, but it was something like the police are funded with like $100 billion of the government's money, right? But schools is only like $25 billion, and what was the other thing? It was something else very important, but it was only like $34 billion. So if you were to take, you know, the $75 billion that it takes to restructure, it was homelessness, right? It was homelessness like in order to completely eradicate homelessness in the U.S., it would take about $34 billion, I think is what it said. So if you just took those two numbers, subtracted them from the police, and gave them to those other places, the world would be significantly better. But, you know, once again, that comes down to the defunding of the police, which would take a lot because they require a lot to get their jobs done in the way that they currently do them. So the defund the police movement is growing. Here's what it actually means. This is from Newsweek. This was published by Chantal da Silva yesterday on 6/4. We're going to talk about George Floyd. Protesters. The push for governments to defund the police is growing. The concept of defunding law enforcement is rooted in the idea of eliminating funds for policing and redirecting that money to initiatives that directly serve communities, including education, healthcare, and community programming. Because if you help the community out and build those people up, they will be, in turn, less inclined to commit crimes, right? You build these people up, they're like, hey, maybe I don't have to deal drugs. Maybe I'll start a business instead. Do. Things like that. However, recent calls to defund the police are centered more around gradually reducing funds for law enforcement and seeing that money redirected into communities. Speaking with Newsweek on Thursday, Jamani Montag of the Critical Resistance, a national member-based grassroots organization working to dismantle the prison industrial complex in the U.S., which is another thing that I have a problem with, especially seeing as I work at a prison, said that the driving goal of defunding law enforcement is to abolish the current systems of policing and justice as we know it and replace it with transformative justice. There is always, this is a quote, there is always going to be harm, and we have to find transformative ways to think about how we're addressing harm in a way that's not promoting disposability and not promoting punishing people, Montague said. In a world without policing, Montague said, communities have to find new ways of managing harm and building a sense of collective care and interdependency. Our conflicts have become property of the state. We don't even have a relationship to how we deal with our conflicts anymore, Montague said. That automatically gets directed to 9/11. Oh, to 911, excuse me. Yeah, they should change that. Change the date. Never forget. However, already, Montague noted, reliance on 911 and law enforcement is not shared across communities in the U.S. Many in the black community and in other communities, including undocumented immigrants and the trans community, can I say the word community? Community. It's a great show. Many in these communities have never really been able to rely on the police or call the police, so they already have strong systems of mutual need and ways of dealing with conflict in the community when it happens. That is absolutely correct. I think I've called the police. I think just once, and it was because someone in my neighborhood when I lived at home with my parents, there were crazy fighting down the street, and they were just down there, and it sounded loud and hectic, and I wasn't gonna go over there because I didn't want to get my ass beat. So I called the cops anonymously, and I was like, "Hey, can you come to and break up this thing that's going on? It sounds violent." And I hung up, and that was it. That was all I did. When it comes to like help for myself, thankfully, I haven't come into a lot of personal conflict where I thought that I'd have to rely on the police to save me, because when it comes down to it, I've seen tons and tons of stories where the black people call the police and then the police show up and then arrest the black people, and it's like, wait, what? I called y'all. Stop hitting me with that club and go get that other guy who was hitting me with a club earlier. It's just a double down, you know. So I am 100% scared of the police, and you know, my way of dealing with those situations is probably vastly different than somebody else who has less fear of the police. Let's keep going. Let's talk about defunding. Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors calls for defunding. It's received widespread attention, gaining signatures from high-profile celebrities. Oh, celebrities like this? John Legend, Megan Rapinoe, I don't know who that is. Lizzo, I know that. The Weeknd, Jane Fonda, Natalie Portman, Jamila Jamil, lovely. Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, Anthony Romero, and others. Oh, look, there's John Legend right there. Not only are communities mourning for Floyd, but also for countless others on a devastatingly long list of black people who have been killed at the hands of vigilantes or law enforcement, including those whose cases we don't know yet and may never know since they were killed without a camera recording it. That right there is also one of the, it's like one of my nightmares, is that I'm going to have an interaction with the police, I'm not going to be able to record it, and then nobody's going to find out what happened to me, you know? Scary. Black communities are living in persistent fear of being killed by state authorities like police, immigration agents, or even white vigilantes who are emboldened by state actors. They mean the president. As a result, it argued law enforcement is no longer fit for purpose and should be defunded. The time has come to defund the police, this petition says. Instead of giving law enforcement departments bigger budgets, it said governments should be cutting spending and redirecting it to education, healthcare, and community-based initiatives. So, I mean, overall, I'm about it. I love all that. let's try and look at it from the other side, right? Once again, just to give a super duper totally open mind. If you defund the police and the police have less tools to stop urgent violent crime, then the community will suffer. But okay, let's just keep going. Hang on. So even if you start putting money into those communities now, if you are taking money away from the police, that the transition from bad community to good community is not going to happen overnight. And if you take money away from the police in those bad communities and start trying to give it to the community at large, but right now it's still bad, so they will take that money and use it to their advantage for crime. Now, see, now it's not even making any sense. If it's going to healthcare and education, that's not what's going to happen. My justification is stupid, and I'm sure that justification is out there on the internet. Is there anything in this Newsweek article about what opposers say? It says, however, it is unclear exactly where cuts would be made to police budget or how it will affect the department. It is also unclear how the funds will be distributed to black communities. That's in Los Angeles, where they are making cuts up to $150 million to the police budget and reinvesting those funds in black communities. Okay, so no, they didn't really say what any opposers are saying about defunding the police. But I think that's where their minds would probably go, is but the crime rate is definitely going to go up, and we're gonna stop protecting people if we don't have the money and the tools that we need to do our jobs. And they might be right about that. I don't know, across the nation. I don't know what crime rates are. I don't know anything. It might be that they need a lot of the things that they need to do the real job, but they're also at the same time definitely using a lot of that money and a lot of those tools to do a terrible job. So overall, I'm all for defunding the police. All right, so let's head over to close out the show, and let's see what cops are saying. Okay, this is on Reddit. It says, got cop questions, maybe we got cop answers. This is a Reddit thread. It's r/askleo. Anything and everything pertaining to law enforcement is acceptable so long as you stay civil. Have a cop question. Hopefully you can find your answer here. Okay. Got a mega thread about George Floyd. Maybe I'll look in there. Let's see. Is it easier to become a law enforcement officer now due to worldwide protests? I'm kind of just looking for a defunding question. Maybe I should have looked more specifically earlier. As a young white male, what can I do to be pro law enforcement but not considered racist? That's very interesting. Let's see what somebody said about that. Police officer said, just be a good person, period. I mean, that's dope. Here's one that says, that's very subjective. I had a conversation with some coworkers who think the right thing to do when shoulder bumped at a bar is to knock that person out. To them, a violent response to a bit of disrespect is the right thing to do. And by doing the right thing, you are a good person. So their view of being a good person includes violence when there is no threat. But most people can agree that good people don't resort to violence until absolutely necessary. Okay, I want to know that whatever coworker said that is an insane person. They are a psychopath and they're a total asshole. Yes, that's what this person said. Absolutely. All right, let's get out of this thread. Let's look at something else. I'd really like to see if anyone has asked them a question about defunding. What do you wish the public knew about your job? This is a good question. It says, I don't have anything else to add to this question. Just what do you think everyone should know about the police that most people don't know? A police officer says, there we go. I've taken a few law students on ride-alongs their professors mandated for a class. They always came away shocked at what we deal with on a daily basis. I think most people would be. I think that's true too. I think that being a police officer is an incredibly difficult job, and that not everyone is cut out for it. You know, you have to have so many skills to be a good cop, and come out on top. You have to be patient. You have to be empathetic. You kind of got to be a good shot. You got to be fast on your feet. You have to think on your feet. You know, you have to think critically about these situations. You have to make big decisions over and over and over again every day. And then there's also a lot of like paperwork and stuff that you got to do. Let's see what else these cops are saying. This one says that our jobs are filled with 2% pure death-defying excitement, and 23% is nonsense details or administrative crap, and 75% is pure and utter boredom. Now, that sounds almost like a correctional officer. I think that those numbers are basically the same for corrections, in that you do a lot of it just sitting around, waiting for something to happen. 2% pure death-defying excitement. That's interesting. I wonder what his definition of death-defying excitement is. This one says that we are human too, but we are not afforded the right to make human mistakes. And now, I would disagree with that, in that sometimes some of y'all get away with a lot of stuff. A lot. And that's kind of due to the fraternity aspect of the police, and that they're all kind of like want to protect each other, the boys in blue or whatever, in that when somebody fucks up over here, the rest of these dudes are like, nah, he ain't do that. He ain't do it. We good. We're all cool over here. Whereas in a better world, if this guy fucks off and does something terrible and bad, that he makes a mistake, a big mistake that causes death or destruction or, you know, whatever, something bad. If he makes a mistake, that instead of everyone going, no, he didn't do that, back off, that they all go, yeah, you made a mess up, and maybe it should mean that you shouldn't be a police officer anymore, like at all. And I think that's hard for a lot of these guys to accept, because they get in nice and young, fresh out the academy or whatever, at 18, 22, however old they are, and it's all they know how to do. And if you make that big mistake, if you couldn't handle being a good cop and you get ousted, then your life feels like it's over. And so that's where a lot of that protection comes from. All of this, it's a lot of loops and circles, and that's why it's so hard to eradicate the system of all the bad. But let's see what else they're saying. And if you're a cop listening to this and anything I'm saying isn't making any sense or feels like it's completely wrong or out of left field, please leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about what I'm saying, because I want to know more. But let's see what else they're saying. This fool said, I wish people knew less about my job. This last one says, I wish people knew that the media only writes when something goes wrong. We have hundreds of meaningful conversations with poor souls who just want someone to talk to. These talks really give meaning to the job, and sometimes you get thanked for taking the time and showing that we care, and it's very rewarding. And I like that a lot, because that's something that I have seen with my own eyes, for sure, is that a police officer shows up to a situation, effectively de-escalates it, talks it out with the people involved, and everyone walks away happy, healthy, and safe. And I bet that happens, hopefully, I hope that happens a lot more often than damage, destruction, guns out, clubs out, tasers out, you know? But I don't know. I don't know what the ratio is on those types of things. But this guy is saying that it feels very rewarding to have those talks, and he probably has those talks a lot of the time. Maybe that 75% pure and utter boredom that other guy was talking about, maybe for this guy, it's filled with a lot more meaningful conversations and betterment of himself and his community. Maybe. And he's right that the media only writes when something goes wrong. Now, I will say that I'm a huge fan of true crime. And so I get roused and super excited and extremely happy when I see detectives able to take down, figure out a crime, a violent crime, a horrible crime that has happened, and that person is sent off to jail and prosecuted appropriately. It feels great. I love it when that happens, and I read about it constantly. So to say that they only read about the cops is when something goes wrong, I think is wrong and unfair. But for especially right now, the media attention on police officers is pretty negative. And it would be nice if we highlighted more of those good cops. But as this whole episode has kind of been about, is that the whatever the ratio of good cops to bad cops is, the system is bad right now. It's not wholly good, and it needs to be rectified. And if if showing how bad it is what gets it to be good, then I'd rather show the bad than the good, I suppose. You know, it's kind of a tricky situation regardless. All right. Let's see. Should I get some more pro-police opinions to round out the episode? Let's see here. So let's go to the mega thread about George Floyd and see if there's anything in here about defunding, which I'd still like to know a police officer's opinion about. Okay, let's see. Let's look at some of the questions that are being asked in this George Floyd specific mega thread on Reddit. Do you fear that people you know will think of you or your beliefs differently because you're working during this despite not necessarily having a choice? Do you fear that people you know will think of you or your beliefs differently because you're working during this despite not necessarily having a choice? And this cop says, not at all. There is an overwhelming support for law enforcement in this country. I'm able to recognize that. The problem with a lot of law enforcement members is we deal with constant negativity. No one ever calls the cops because they are having a good day. Not many people get stopped by an officer and are grateful for the citation that they just received. This constant negative atmosphere can lead to a lot of police officers to develop an us versus them mentality, which leads to them believing they don't have support. And on a personal level, people that truly know me know that I will try my hardest to do what's right. That's a lot of responsibility that you have to have as a police officer. It's a lot. A lot of responsibility and a lot of negativity. Even from people like me, you know, because once again, I've had good relationships with officers, not necessarily police officers. I've had interactions with police officers that have been great, and I've seen police officers in action doing things that are good. But I've also heard so much negative and seen so much negative and felt so much fear of that negativity happening to me that it's hard to trust them. So if a seemingly good cop like this were to interact with me and it felt hostile for even a second, I might blow up at this guy, you know, and he might not necessarily deserve it. And I bet that happens a lot to a lot of cops. Okay, here we go. Here's a question. This is a civilian saying, I've been peacefully protesting in New York City the past few days and have been surprised by the number of police officers not wearing masks. Maybe 25 to 50% of officers, many of them in really close proximity to protesters, haven't had any sort of mask or face covering. I'm perplexed. Aside from the issue of setting a good example for the community, aren't these officers putting themselves at massive risk of COVID infection? I wouldn't want to get anywhere near those enormous crowds without an N95. Why are the police putting their own health at risk? To be clear, this isn't an NYPD is being bad gotcha question. I'm just genuinely curious about the thought process behind skipping the mask. Thank you. So pandemic is still happening at this time, for sure, despite all these protests. And yeah, it is a real thing that you should probably be wearing a mask to prevent infection for everybody. Let's see what this cop says. He says, just a theory. I'm not sure about New York City, but a large number of my coworkers are diehard conservative Trumpers and believe everything he says and don't believe the media, etc. The mantra the past few days from many of them has been, it's funny how now that there's riots and protests, the whole corona thing disappeared. I told you it was fake. Before that, it was, the whole mask thing is stupid. What's a cloth mask going to do to protect me? I only wear mine at work so I don't get bitched at and to get into stores, or just not wearing it, period, once the getting bitched at stopped out of fatigue. Before that, it was, what's the point of wearing eye protection when interacting with the public? Shit can still come in at the sides. It's not hermetically sealed to my face. Before that, it was, coronavirus has killed this number of people. Cool. The normal flu kills this number of people a year, and swine flu killed this number of people a few years ago. It's just a bad flu. If NYPD is anything like my department, half of them are willfully blind to the risks. That's great. I mean, obviously that's not great, but that's great. What he said is that a lot of people, and he says that he's in the military police. He says that a lot of cops, they just don't care. You know, they're not thinking about their safety or your safety in that way, because they, like our president, has kind of blatantly disregarded the dangerousness of the current pandemic and the situation that surrounds it. Which goes on to say that a lot of cops should not be cops because you're not smart enough. You're not effective enough. You're not good enough to do the job that you have to do. You're a big dum-dum like me. Ha! There we go. All right. Okay, here we go. Here's a good question. This is from a civilian. I'm not saying their names just because I don't know why I'm not saying their names, but I'm going to continue to not do it. This is a civilian. He says, does the brotherhood inherent to your profession ever seem to get in the way of identifying and weeding out the bad cops? Can anything be done about it, and should anything be done about it? This cop says, not in my experience. I work for what is probably an average size department. We have about 65 sworn police officers from the chief down in a town of roughly 60,000 in a pretty small county. That sounds like where I live. Ceres has about 45,000 people. They probably have a few more cops than this, but it's a small town, small county. He says, we all know each other and most of the people in neighboring agencies because a lot of our resources are pooled. We all know each other and we know people in neighboring agencies. The bad cops I've worked with or known about have all been rooted out in my time. I would say that the brotherhood actually helps to identify bad cops. Getting rid of them is an administrative decision made by people who, although are cops, I wouldn't consider part of my street level brotherhood. I've never hung out with my upper management outside of official functions. However, I would come to their aid when they called. As for cops around the country, yeah, I can relate to them when we meet, and it's a brotherhood in the sense that we all have similar experiences, but they aren't my brothers in the way the guys on my shift are or in my department are. Okay, that's fair. If a department has an issue with the blue wall of silence, the citizens affected should contact their elected representatives. City councils, mayors, county board members, state representatives can all create a lot of pressure on department heads. And as far as I know, all sheriffs are elected people. If they don't want to listen to the people, they can be voted out. And number 3, if it's a problem, absolutely. I'm nowhere near Minneapolis, yet this current issue is making my job more difficult and dangerous. So that's interesting. This guy says that, like, yes, he feels a brotherhood with his fellow police officers, but that wouldn't stop him from putting a bad cop in jail or taking a bad cop off the force. But once again, he's in a small community where maybe the levels of crime aren't necessarily what they are in like a bigger city, where there might be more corruption and more corruption within his own department, you know, where the pressure being put on his department head, you know, isn't as sufficient because the state can't get through because of corruption in the upper levels of the management and whatnot. So in his experience, no, the brotherhood is not going to keep him from turning in a bad cop. I will say that at my prison, I work at a state prison, and I'm sure there are definitely bad officers there. Actually, I know that there are bad officers there, but they get rooted out pretty quickly through through the upper level managements of the system, because we're a state facility, and with inmates, if an inmate is treated poorly, if an inmate is treated negatively in a legal sense, then they can sue. And when they sue, they will sue the state. And they can sue the state for a lot of money. So because the state has been sued a fair number of times at specifically my prison, what they were sued for has become policy now. So our use of force policy is very clear cut and dry. You have to have this thing happen, and this thing happen before you can use force. And if you use force before those things happen, then you're basically done. You're going to get cut up and cut out. And we're going to see it because there's cameras everywhere at the prison institution. And I would think that it would be the same for the police, right? That if somebody does something bad, and somebody reports it, or somebody finds out, or somebody just looks at the camera footage that is supposedly directly on all of the police officers, then they will be rooted out and removed because the state doesn't want to be sued. But maybe it's harder to sue the state police departments than it is to sue the state prisons. I'm not sure. Once again, dumb. Okay. Let's look for one more question and then we'll wrap it up. All right. Let's look at this question. It says, from a civilian, I know these issues have come up many times in the past, including the protests and even riots. It would seem much hasn't changed as a result. Does anything appear different to you this time? Do you think improvement is actually possible this time? The protests and issues seem to have gained unusual traction, with even many of the law enforcement officers accepting and supporting protesters at many places nationwide. I haven't seen that before, with many sheriffs and chiefs making pretty extreme hard stances publicly, like the one that told the officers under him to turn it in and quit if they didn't see anything wrong with what happened to George Floyd, which seems unusual to me. Is it different? Do you think that it has the momentum to get us over the wall of silence? That seems the real barrier to me. If the 99% good ones can correct the rare bad apples, doesn't it seem we're just going to be doing this again in the future? A good question. So this cop says, let's talk about bad apples and the 99% good ones for a minute, and I'll start with an unpopular truth. Good cops hate bad cops as much or more than you do because they cause stuff like what we're going through right now. Most of us have two major goals. Don't make the news, and don't get a rule named after you. Onward. And he's going to continue. But that's good. I mean, most of us have two major goals. Don't make the news, and don't get a rule named after you. So do your job well, and, don't make it harder for the rest of us to do our jobs, basically. Because, look, if defunding the police becomes a national thing, right? All over the country, police departments are defunded, and police are either paid less or get less time worked, less overtime, less equipment, whatever. That affects every single police officer in the country, and it'll all be because of the stupid, incredibly idiotic, aggressive, angry actions of that Derek Chauvin guy who killed George Floyd. Don't make the news, and don't get a rule named after you. That's funny. All right, onward. He says, a large department is an organization like a corporation. Like a corporation, we all work for the same company, but not necessarily together. You have patrol, which is divided into shifts, and then often divided into task force. You have various investigative departments that may or may not be uniformed, like theft and homicide, perhaps a SWAT team, negotiators, criminal intelligence, internal affairs, administrative operations, jail, etc. Each one is different according to the needs of the community and budget that they are given. In a larger organization, we don't all know each other, much less what each of us is doing at any given time. So when you say 99% don't stop the bad ones, there is a really good chance we don't know that the bad ones, or at least don't know that they are bad. Either he is in another division, in another shift. I've never made a scene with him. I may pass him in the hall, but I don't know his name. When he got called out to assist me, he didn't do any bad cop stuff around me. It is definitely on us to police ourselves, and officers who know of an abusive cop and don't stop it or at least say something are culpable. But I bet 99% of us don't know a truly abusive officer. So that's interesting. He's saying basically that there's so many cops everywhere that there's not enough bad ones for all of us good ones to jump on top of them and see that all of their behavior is bad and to correct it or whatever. It's too big of a system. A civilian replied to that officer and said, "We have seen hundreds of videos of police brutality over the past few days. The so-called good cops do not stop the brutality their peers engage in, but rather just stand by. Why do you think this is?" And I'm going to answer this one and say that, like, okay, I'm a good cop, right? I'm good. I follow the letter of the law all the way. I try and do my best by my fellow man. I'm right next to a cop. I think he's a good cop, right? I'm a good cop. I think he's a good cop. Maybe he's not my partner. Maybe he is my partner. Maybe I've known him for 6 months. Maybe I've known him for 10 years. I'm here. He's there. If he breaks out into a fight with somebody that maybe I didn't see the initial start of, right? I didn't see exactly how it went down. He breaks out into a fight. I assume he's a good cop, so I'm going to back him up in beating the shit out of this 19-year-old lady or whatever. Because I assume that my good cop buddy over here is a good cop. And I think that's a lot of what is happening in these videos. It's more assumptions and facts. And when you're seeing it in a video, it's a lot different than being there in real life. And I think cops go through this kind of tunnel vision thing, which happens a lot. You kind of get so wrapped up in the moment that you can't even really see. You're putting blinders on to whatever's not directly in front of you. So, sometimes you're out there and you're kind of in aggro mode because you think that you might have to do something. And, somebody throws a water bottle at your head from the back, and then you just wild out. And then the cops next to you are like, "Is he wilding out for a good reason? Probably. Let's wild out too." And then everybody starts wilding out. And once again, I'm not saying this is a good justification. I think it's pretty shitty, honestly, and that you should have a lot more awareness of your surroundings and all of that. But I'm not a cop, and I don't get into those kind of situations, and I don't know exactly what it's like. So it might be harder to stop your buddy from beating an old man or whatever without having the full context of exactly what just happened. You might not know. It happened right next to you, but you legitimately might not have seen it. Might not know the context. So that's interesting. I kind of like that. Do you like that? I think I'm gonna close this one out. Let me know. Let me know if any of this made sense. If it sounds good to you, if it sounds bad. Let me know what you think. Do you think the cops should be defunded? What do you think of the protests going on right now? Do you think that the police force, as it stands in the United States today, should stay exactly the same? Do you think it should change? Do you think maybe we should adopt some of those Peel principles where we police by consent and we make it a more community style police system? I don't know. I'm not going to create a new police system right here on a podcast. I can't do it. I don't have the wherewithal. I don't. But if you do, let me know. Drop a comment down below. You guys, my name is Andre Morton. Follow me at Andre Morton Jr. I'm everywhere. Subscribe to the podcast. Andre knows everything. I'm on YouTube. I should be on Anchor and iTunes. I haven't set any of that stuff up yet, so I'm not exactly sure where I'm at. But go there and follow me. I should be everywhere. Anywhere you can get a podcast, you should be able to get Andre Knows Everything. So thank you so much. That's been it. What else am I supposed to tell you to do? Like, subscribe, comment, follow. Hit me up on my DMs. Slide in. I'm married. Don't slide in too hard. That's been it for now. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I love you. And now I know more than I did yesterday. Bye.